Vale, el bloque 2, como comentábamos antes, bueno, quiere presentar por un lado qué se está haciendo para estandarizar el uso de BIM para infraestructuras, que es una labor que ha empezado más tarde que la edificación, pero en la que BIM ya lleva, creo que 4 años desde que se planteó que era necesario seguir este camino, y luego contaremos, bueno, pues con algunos casos, yo creo que de grandes empresas que están trabajando en BIM en grandes proyectos y que bueno, creo que serán de bastante utilidad. El primer ponente, la verdad es que es un honor poder contar con Phil Jackson, y además cuando le invitamos, le escribí a ver si sonaba la flauta, ¿no?, como decimos aquí, y la verdad es que me contestó que sí, que le cuadraba la agenda y que no tenía ningún inconveniente en venir. Se ha levantado a las 3:30 de la mañana para ir al aeropuerto, a Heathrow y venir. Entonces, bueno, yo creo que hemos dado bastante café, esperemos que sea muy provechoso todo lo que nos va a contar. Y su presentación será en inglés. Le he pedido que hable despacito porque así nosotros entendemos el inglés mejor todos. Y nada, damos paso a Phil Jackson, please. Thank you.
I'll take my coat off. I'm afraid I can't speak to you in Spanish, but I'll try to speak slowly. I can't talk as fast as you can anyway, because you can see. So I'm Phil Jackson. My background is useful for this. Is I'm a civil engineer.
Can you use these sneakers, maybe?
Oh, use this. Okay. I need to.
Yeah. Okay. What do you want?
Okay. Does it work? I'll tell you what my background is. I'm a civil engineer. I started work as civil engineer a long time ago, mostly in roads and bridges. And I'm a fellow of the UK Institution of Civil Engineers. Hence, I have an affiliation with you in this building.
It works.
It works. Wonderful. And then for some reason, I got involved in information technology. And then for some reason, I got involved in information about civil engineering projects and civil engineering assets. And was IT director for a large consultant in the UK for a period of time. More recently, have been involved in the efforts for BIM within the UK. So I've been a member of the UK BIM task group and had responsibility for 2 years for helping the Highways England and the Environment Agency in the UK rolling out what now gets called BIM, but I actually think is not BIM. I think it's digital engineering. It's about information, and it's not just about 3D modeling. I always stress that when I get on a platform, because everyone thinks that if you buy a piece of software, you can do BIM. No, BIM is not software. BIM is actually about a process of collecting information and using that information all the way through the life cycle of any asset. So what I want to do today, unusual for me, I'm talking about BIM itself, but I want to talk about the Building Smart Infraroom and what we're doing internationally and the projects that we're working on internationally to make BIM open. And so I'm going to talk about the establishment of the Building Smart International Infraroom. I'm going to talk about its mission, how we govern it. Then I'll look at the work plan, some of the projects that we're actually currently undertaking, and then how that gets related to national chapters of Building Smart. And then, because I think it gives you a flavor, we recently had a summit, Building Smart International, in Rotterdam, which is a 6-monthly affair where we actually sit down and get together and do some work on actually working out these standards and challenging ourselves as to where we go in the future. So those are the sorts of things I'm going to try to cover. It does work, look. So just to tell you what the Infraroom in Building Smart International is, it is the special interest group in Building Smart for infrastructure. I don't know who chose to call them rooms, but they're basically special interest groups. It was set up in 2013, and it's an open forum, an interest group that welcomes users and people with technical interests in infrastructure. And it recognizes the need for neutral geometric and semantic data models. Notice I say geometric and data models for infrastructure. And the Infraroom governs the development of international open standards based on building smart principles. And now, from its establishment, it is the largest and most active room in the whole of Building Smart International. The interest is great around the world. I think people are realizing that infrastructure spends a lot of money. It actually has a lot of interest in collecting data, and buildings are just part of infrastructure. And unfortunately, we've been linking BIM to buildings far too long. And if you really want to know what I think BIM is, it's not buildings, it's better information management. So our mission as the infrastructure room is to enhance and develop open standards and for intelligent data, which enables the process of data integration for infrastructure. So it is about open data exchange, open data capture. The Infraroom is perhaps a pioneer in many ways in Building Smart International, in that it actually has got itself set up very professionally and actually has a governance organization. So it's managed by a steering committee, which is an elected steering committee. There's an election going on at the moment, in fact, for 2 new members, and it's called the Infracom. It's chaired by Christophe Castaing from France, and assisted by Henk Schaap from the Netherlands. And then there's if we do projects, those projects are governed by a project steering committee. And that steering committee is made up of people, you can see the names there, but it doesn't matter about the names. There are representatives across the whole of infrastructure, and also the actual organization of Building Smart. So I'm actually doing one of the projects within the Infraroom, and there is a project board. There's the sponsors of the project, those who are paying, lead the management. But actually, I have to take part in a monthly progress meeting that actually says, are you doing what we really need to do? I get challenged. I have to sit on the phone or in a room for 2 hours and publish project dashboards, which we're going to publish internationally so that people know how our projects are going, how well they're meeting targets, and any issues that we might have, and actually just to keep communications going. So the whole thing is set up very professionally to actually be able to do that. So that's the governance, that's the Infraroom, and actually how the Infraroom works in terms of that. One of the things I want to explain is actually how standards are developed and what relationship those standards have to local chapters and local interest groups or other interest groups. So this diagram is not mine. I think it's far too fussy, but never worry. It actually says that we actually have the capture of information and requirements from local chapters, local interest groups, and even third parties. So they act and capture that information, and the project steering room, the actual committee, looks at those things and then puts business cases together and then takes those things through to solution. So the funnel is the yellow bit on the left, and the blue bit is the project Infraroom that actually develops those standards. And Then those standards are handed over to the users, the local chapters, to be deployed and to be used and to be pushed out into the market. Now, the reason we do that is actually because we're making sure that actually we don't just have local standards, but we have standards that can be applied across the world, because most of us these days work in a global market. And so in a global market, we need standards that work not just here in Spain, but in France and in the Middle East and in the Far East. So it's very important that we actually are able to do that. So we have a process for capturing requirements, even capturing work that's already been done to turn that into standards that then can be deployed and implemented and trained locally. Now, interestingly, a number of organizations and countries around the world have already developed some standards. And some of those standards are built upon an independent set of thinking, but actually contain some very good information. So we'll talk a little bit more later about two particular ones. But what we have actually decided to do is to say, well, that work must be published because it contains good information about local requirements and information about how we can filter that into international standards. And so we have agreed that we will publish publicly available specifications, not standards, but documents that actually document the standards that have been developed elsewhere so that others can see those, and actually we can use them in developing the international standards. So when you see a standard from Building Smart International and you see it's got PAS in front of it, that's a publicly available specification. It isn't an international standard, but we're taking it into account in international standards. So just to be clear then, we've got the capture mechanism for local chapters saying we need this, or we've got this, we can actually sponsor this, we want to do this. And in fact, that's quite commonly what's been happening. The projects I talk about later have been projects that have been sponsored by, mostly by the Trafikverket in Sweden, the Finnish National Roads Authority, and Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands. They've put up the money and said, we need this, these are our requirements. Please can we have please can we develop the standards internationally? And we'll talk about those projects in a moment. Okay. So then on to the current projects and the projects we actually are currently working on or are delivering. Very important in infrastructure that actually lots of infrastructure works with some form of alignment, some form of linear mathematics. It says, this is the line of my road or my railway, and that's defined by curves and straights and transitions and what have you. And actually that is basically the grid with which we build any road or rail project, or even canal project if you're working in the Netherlands. Or maybe you have canals here as well, I don't know whether you... and to do that, we actually specified a project which said we want to develop an open standard, which we call IFC, International Foundation Class, for alignment. And that was undertaken and completed at the early part of this year. Important to note that it was developed in association with OGC, that's the Organization for Geotechnical, I can't remember what the C stands for. It's the Geotechnical Standards, Open Standards Organization. Important thing for that is that actually what we have realized is that GIS and BIM are the same thing, basically. It's information about things. And GIS does information about things, and BIM does information about things, and we've let the two go off that way. And actually what we're doing is making sure that we do this in conjunction with the bigger geo standards as well. Now, the first version of that alignment didn't contain all the maths and all the knowledge that we wanted, particularly in developing curves, transition curves for railways, and a number of other things. So in fact, we have there is a sponsored project that now is extending that, funded, underway and progressing well. It's going to be completed this year. And again, it's jointly developed with the OGC. So there is a 1.1 step that actually adds more curves, more mathematics to that alignment. Foundation to much of what we do in infrastructure. Now, of course, it's no good unless we can deploy it, unless we can actually make sure it works with software and the software vendors can provide the information and we can use that. So there is an association with these two projects, a deployment project, which is about to get underway. And actually, I'm here in Spain, I can ask you this, we're actually seeking project pilot sponsors. So if you have projects, we have vendors who want to work, then I can make contact and we can make sure you're involved. Currently, pilot sponsorship is coming from Traffic Paket in Sweden and Rijkswaterstaat in Holland. They have one software vendor involved at the present moment, which is Trimble, the producers of Tekla and Vianova. Now, I know there's different local softwares here and different local softwares around the world. The important aspect is that we need pilots to actually start to bring those on board. And so that's a request. If you've got pilots, then talk to me and we'll get you involved. Second project, which is currently underway, is something that actually is foundational and absolutely important. And that is that, and it came from the fact that we actually realized there were lots of standards being developed. So someone was developing a standard for railways, and actually railways have embankments and surfaces and drainage and bridges and all those sorts of things. And someone developed a standard for roads, and they have exactly the same thing, but they approached it differently. So we had two standards that weren't compatible. So in order to give us good foundation to actually cover the sorts of things that infrastructure needs that actually is beyond building Lego, which is what the building guys deal with, we actually need to be able to cover things like surfaces, embankments, excavations that actually are more complex than just digging foundations for building. And it will then provide a foundation for road and rail standards to actually be built upon. And so we then got consistency. Now, again, we're doing that in conjunction with OGC. OGC have produced a standard, a concept standard, which they call Land Infra, that covers many of those aspects. And so we're doing it in parallel with them and making sure that those things align. Now, that's funded and it's underway. Notice I'm actually saying these things have to be funded. It doesn't come out of thin air, and it doesn't come out of just everyone trying to get together and just saying, oh, we'll club together and do it. This takes time and it needs project rigor. It's progressing well. There's a first phase report, which is now out and being agreed with the sponsors and agreed with the steering committee. And it's due for completion this year. Now, it won't cover everything, but it will cover the basics. It'll be the foundation for much of what we want to do. And it's exciting to actually see that is there. For too long, we said, well, we can do IFC for everything, and then realize that infrastructure needed more, and now we're getting there. I was pressing the right button originally, wasn't I? Okay. The third project that's underway is one that actually looks at the requirements of asset managers for BIM. Now, I can talk more about that if you really want me to, because I'm actually project leading that. And that's looking at, or is designed to look at, what are the requirements that asset managers want us to collect about the objects that we're building and the tools we're using to manage their part of the life cycle. So one really interesting thing about infrastructure in particular is that we've concentrated our BIM on the building bit, but actually building and construction and design only visits an asset. The asset is there for many, many years and needs that information to be able to do it. So we're capturing information required by asset owners and managers. That is funded and is underway. I'm currently talking to a number of organizations. I'm hoping today to make contact with the right organizations here in Spain to actually talk about their requirements. But the interesting thing is that up until to date, BIM tends to collect stuff as to, well, how do we build this, not how do we manage it, and making sure that we collect that information. And I'm reporting results of that in the summit in Korea in September. But I'm currently looking for participants, and I will get some volunteers from here, I'm sure. There are other projects that are going on within the Infraroom. There's a project for IFC Bridge. It's in planning. There's been a lot of work done around the world on IFC Bridge, some in France, some in Japan. Again, it's one of those things that actually says, well, this is what we're doing here, but hasn't actually taken the global thing into account. It's ready to go. It's got its case there, and it's ready to be fast-tracked. But at the present moment, it's seeking funding. And so, again, that's a plea for funding. We have, as I've explained before, this joint memorandum of understanding with OGC to develop in parallel against their requirements. And then going back to the comment I made about the publicly available specifications, the PASs, we have now made an agreement with China Rail to publish their BIM for railways, IFC, as a PAS. And that is due to be published, unfortunately, in English, not in Spanish. The other alternative was in Mandarin, which was that's due to be published in the autumn. And similarly, there's a lot of work done by the Korean Roads guys, and we're going to publish that in English, and they've agreed to do that in the autumn. So it will be at least a good informative document. So just to give you a flavor of the sort of momentum that's actually happening, and a flavor of direction of travel, if you like. I went to the Rotterdam summit.
Next year we'll be in Spain.
Next year we'll be in Spain, here, in Madrid.
Or Barcelona.
Oh, Barcelona. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know Barcelona was in Spain.
It depends.
I'm not talking to any Catalans here, I'm not saying. Sorry. But great if it's here. So I'll be here wherever. I love Barcelona. This is the first time I've been to Madrid, and I have to come and go in one day. So the next summit is in Korea, as I said. But we met in April, and there were 175 people there, not just for infrastructure. There are 800, in terms of working parties, there were 8,400 hours worked. And there were rooms, building room, infrastructure room, product room, regulatory room, technical room, and strategic activities like how do we do design for manufacturers. So there was a lot of activity that goes on there and actually trying to bring together these standards. The one thing that came across to me was the increasing client interest in open BIM. Now, when you think about it, that's really obvious because they're the guys that really should benefit with the information at the end of the chain. But if I just summarize three things that I saw, one is we had a delegation from BIM Rail Alliance in China come across, talk about what they're doing, what they're going to put in, what they put in their PAS. Shocking, they're doing 30,000 kilometers of railway in 4 years. We worry about hundreds of kilometers in Europe. They don't have planning permission problems like we do, and environmental problems, perhaps, I don't know. But they actually are working on producing all of that in a digital environment. The guys in Reichsvaterstadt, Herman Winkels, actually spoke to us about the work that they're doing in collecting information and creating all the data that actually they need to use to operate their assets. And so they've actually got systems that collect contractually all the data once every 3 months from every project on their roads and other work. And the guys from Schiphol were there, Schiphol Airport, saying how they're managing and collecting that data as something that they need in an open format for them to be able to use. So there is increasing need and increasing requirement from clients. Often you will hear a lot about BIM that says, well, it's about how we do our design. And that's where a lot of time was concentrated, and people talked about clash detection and things like that. Important stuff, but actually this goes beyond that, and similarly with construction. The other recurring theme was actually a theme which talked about semantic linked data. So the idea that we can link data semantically using the web and web tools and the WC3 standards occurred again and again, and we now have a special interest group beginning to look at how we can link data rather than actually say this is a cast in stone dictionary standard. We can now start to link dictionaries because we can do it semantically. And so there's a project which is sponsored by Trafikverket and Reichsvaterstadt, which isn't a building smart project, but they call it VCOM, which actually is about collecting semantic data for roads. That's underway, halfway through its process. And the interesting thing is with Holland in particular is the Reichsvaterstadt are collecting their information in semantic language. So they're using a tool called OWL. If anyone's technical here, that's about as much as I know about it, but they're actually building semantic databases of the objects that they collect information about, telling the contractors they want information about that and making them supply information. But it's capable of being linked semantically. So big theme, clients' needs, semantic linked data. So finally, I'll go through very quickly some of the resolutions that came out of the Infraroom that probably give you a color and a flavor of project process. So the overall architecture, these were resolutions that say they were accepting the use cases there, and they wanted to continue to collaborate across the industry, but also to collaborate with OGC. So there was support from the Infraroom to actually push forward on this overall architecture thing and involve requirements from wider chapters. Specifically, the OGC gave a talk on their land infra concept model. A guy from the States called Paul Scarpancini has been driving that. He spoke about that and how that common conceptual model can actually cover much of what we need to do in infrastructure and actually can provide basis for overall architecture. The Infraroom, we've spoken about. The progress is good, and they're encouraging us to do this sponsorship of deployment. The asset managers' requirements, again, we kicked it off at this summit, and we were encouraging people, as I do today, to give local contact about that information. But we actually did look at some stuff that actually said, there are loads of stages in any one project, design stages, strategy stages. It's very easy to say at the end of a project, we hand over components that actually need to be asset managed. But those components, I'm beginning to discover from the work I've done thus far, need to have the knowledge about why they're there. What function do they carry out? And so I've invented this idea that actually every component needs its DNA from the very beginning. What's its requirement? Why is it doing that? Then normally in BIM to date, we have not collected that. We need to start collecting it, because then we're going to be, we can actually go back. And actually, interestingly enough, it gives more benefit than you think, because if you actually are halfway down the progress of a project in design and you find you need to make a change, then you can go back through the knowledge and actually say, I know what that knowledge is and how I can, what changes I can make because I've got that information. Or if I'm actually trying to manage my asset and I say, well, what demand, what capacity was this road designed for? Then I can go all the way back in my knowledge trail and say, it was designed for this. What can we do about it? So important things that we're beginning to see that we need to collect in this process. And the IFC bridge, we want to fast track it, but we need the finance to do that. Then I'll quickly flick over that. Future directions are that we want to continue this work with the OGC and to incorporate that. And we want to incorporate all the work also that they're doing on city GML. So looking at smart cities, smart information beyond just the BIM components and the local geographic components. So we want to make sure that what we're doing with BIM supplies the right information for city GML, supplies the right information for smart cities. And we're trying to make that happen. We actually are looking at a work plan for 2017 now. So we're in the formation time of what we're going to do. And we're looking at how can we integrate linked data. And we're looking at more ongoing development with the OGC, model data views for particular aspects. We need standards for libraries of information. Now, that was a very quick tour about what the Building Smart Infraroom are doing. I particularly am quite excited because we are beginning to see a professional organisation who actually is set up to develop these standards, who actually is set up to capture the requirements. And I think it's time to get serious about Open BIM. We've talked about BIM for a long time. We've talked about BIM at the sort of shallow level of little operations and little bits of packages to do this. But the demand, as I've said with clients and others, is high. The Infraroom has got the structure to do it. The funding, interestingly enough, is coming from very few sponsors at the moment. So there is a membership fee for joining Building Smart International, yes, but that's not enough to fund the developments. So the 3 projects I've spoken about are all funded by Trafikverket from Sweden, Rijkswaterstaat from Holland, and Finnish National Roads Authority. Now, believe you me, I'm actually visiting those and I was in Stockholm last week. I was in the Netherlands a week before. They're really beginning to make this move. And actually, if we don't look out, they'll be commanding what's going on in the industry because they are advancing this process. Although they want to share it internationally, they're really serious about collecting this information. So hopefully that's given you a flavour of the Infraroom and what we're doing. Hopefully it's allayed some fears that nothing is happening. There's a lot that is happening. It is going to take some time, but there are things there that we can use now. You can certainly use the IFCs for building for a lot of stuff that we use in infrastructure already. But the thing is to get serious about it and actually to start looking at how can we get involved in this, either in kind, with time, with expertise, or even, dare I say, with getting organisations to put their hands in their pockets and support this. Okay, so hopefully that's helped. Any questions you might have, I'm willing to take. Am I allowed to do that?
That's okay.
Okay, fine. If you have questions, I hope I've been clear and I haven't spoken too fast. No questions. Okay.
So let me make you one question.
Okay. Well, thank you. I thought I was getting away with it.
Yeah. No. So maybe some people are asking about how can I engage, how can I introduce my company to collaborate, which is the best way. Is local chapters, is directly to build smart rooms.
I would say that in general, get involved with your local chapter, but make sure your local chapter is communicating with international through that funnel. So it's the best way to actually, if you sat down and said, these are the requirements we have at the local chapter level, and then translate's not the right word, but deliver them to the international group, then they will know the requirements. And if you can help to support that. So via local chapters, I would say. Unless you're a big global company that actually wants to influence beyond the local chapter. But even then, I say work with your local chapter first.
Thank you. And which is the level of adoption of big software companies about IFC alignment? Or because I was in Rotterdam, they was discussing about if there is not a client demand, of it has to be added value from the software company. So,
let me just get that. I need to get my thinking about that. I need to be careful because I'm dealing with lots of vendors out there.
We are friends.
Okay, it's okay. Software vendors have a mission, and that is really to sell you software and to make some money out of it. They have to add value and make sure there's value in it, because otherwise you wouldn't buy it. But actually, they're not going to lead the demand for open interchange. They really won't, because actually it's not in their interest, unless you're a small company that actually wants to contribute into that arena. So they will look at the demand and how many pieces of software or islands in the cloud that they can sell you. And so the very big ones, and I'm being very careful not to mention any very big ones, will have that in mind and say, I can't develop this or collaborate with you unless there is a demand from the client, which is why I keep saying the demand is actually there. It's actually we're not responding to it, I think. Now, having said that, there are organizations, software organizations, that are beginning to want to be involved. I mentioned Villanova and Tekla, who are part of Trimble. They are solidly involved in actually producing this. They've been very involved in doing open standards for BIM, or not open, but sort of semi-open standards for the Finnish Roads Authority with their infra project. And so a lot of what Villanova do will actually do this. I think it's for us as clients and users to put pressure on the vendors to actually say, this is what we want to do. Now, I've got relationships with some of the vendors, and I know some of them are actually really quite keen to do that. The other problem we have with vendors is the big ones have a long cycle of development. So if I say to them today, give me alignment 1.1, they'll go, well, actually, that'll be in our program for 2018, because that's what they do in terms of their cycle. They've got a big more fleet of foot. This is a personal opinion. Is this being recorded?
No.
No. There's a personal opinion. I think if we get open standards right, we're going to see some other people come in left field and actually do some of this, because actually once you've got data and that data is open, then I can give that data for, I use the example of teenagers who actually understand how to write apps on a phone. They will do some amazing stuff with that information. And I think we're going to see stuff coming left field. And so I'm looking forward to that challenge. But the challenge is there that we actually say, get behind the open standards because it's got huge benefits. Just think, if I am building a road and I actually want to have information about the drainage from a utility or from somewhere else, and I can exchange data in an open way, good data, how much money that will save. Just think, if I've got a survey that's been delivered in open data and actually I need to pick it up and use it for something else. How many jobs actually do a survey, put it in a box, leave it, when they start the project again, they go, oh, we need to do another survey, or we need to do another model, or we need to do something else. If we could actually start to exchange that, just think how much time, money, effort, and speed of delivery that would make. Excuse me, I'm on my soapbox now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.